Hey friends, it's Juliana, and today I'm going to share with you how I created this slimline card for the recent Tim Holtz release that features the 3D Impresslits Butterfly. I began by die cutting several of the butterflies from metallic craft stock, and then I painted each one using paintbrush with salvaged patina distress paint and just worked the paint into the cracks and crevices. While the paint was still dry, I used a paper towel to lightly wipe off the paint that was on the top so that I left the paint down into the cracks and crevices. Once the paint was dry, I added a layer of distressed crackle paint in the clear rock candy just to add a little more distress and texture to the butterflies. Next, I took a walnut distress crayon and worked in small sections over the entire surface of each of the butterflies. At this point, the distress crackle paint is dry as well, and I just rubbed the crayon down again into all the cracks and crevices just to really highlight those areas and achieve a super grungy look. So here I'm getting ready to work on the background, and I'm starting off with a piece of distress heavy stock, and it's cut to 4 by 8.5 inches. I later trimmed that down a little bit, so the finished card is that size. But the stamp sets that I pulled out to work with are Illustrated, Etcetera, Ledger Script, and Field Notes. Field Notes is like one of my all-time favorite stamp sets. I can hardly make a project without using that on something. As far as the ink, I ended up just using a combination of Gathered Twigs and Vintage Photo Distress ink and stamped the images with those. As you can see, I love to use my stamp platform to kind of help lay out and figure out where I want the stamps to be positioned before I settle on the complete design. Now that all the stamping's done, I'm going to do a little ink smooshing with some old paper distress ink, and just smush it onto the craft mat and spritz it with some water and then smush and dab until I'm happy with how it looks, and then I just use my heat tool to dry it up, and decided to add a few splatters using old paper distress spray stain, and simply just splattered it on using the nozzle. And I then dried everything real good with my heat tool and added some more splatters with my distress sprayer and then dabbed those dry. I really like a mix of both drying and dabbing it dry when creating my backgrounds. So here I'm going to add some texture to the background using the Flourish layering stencil and some distress texture paste. I play around a little bit using where I want it to be positioned, and have some mint tape there to hold the stencil in place, but as you'll see later on, I end up just picking up the stencil and moving it around as I'm going. So I'm not really looking for a full, solid, perfect application through the stencil with the texture paste. I'm just kind of wanting little sections here and there for the added interest. Once the texture paste was dry, I decided I really wished it had some color to it, so I placed the stencil back over the stenciled areas and just use my finger to apply a little bit of salvage patina distress paint through the stencil. Looking back on it, if I had known this is what I wanted to do initially, I might have colored the texture paste with the paint just to do the application all in one shot. But this technique worked fine and still helped me achieve the desired look I was going for. It did take a little finagling to figure out how I had placed the stencil over each area, but I eventually got it. Now I'm just adding some ink to the edges of the paper just to finish it off. And here I'm just adding a little bit of vintage photo to the edges. Then decide to add a little more salvage patina in, and first give it a go here with just the distress ink and realize pretty quickly that it just wasn't adding enough color for me. So I actually end up grabbing the distress oxide to get a little more color in there, and that ended up giving me the look I was going for. Here I'm just adding a little more gathered twigs to the edges of the paper. Again, just trying to darken it up a little bit and finish off the background. Here I'm working on the base layer for my card. Again, this is a piece of distress heavy stock, and I'm just making my own custom colored cardstock using distress oxide and salvage patina, and just applying the ink with a blending tool to the edges to create the perfect matching color for my project. Once that was done, then I was ready to assemble the card. Here I'm using some double-sided foam adhesive strips from scrapbook.com to add a little dimension to each of the butterflies. To finish off the card, I'm adding a label sticker from Tim Holtz, and I backed it onto a piece of thin chipboard just to give it a little more, make it a little more substantial, and then popped it up again with a little more of the foam adhesive strips. Thanks so much for stopping by today. I hope you enjoyed seeing how this slimline card came together using the Tim Holtz 3D Impresslits Butterfly.